Hi guys, this is Makeda Voletta, also known as the Body Scientist and the Renaissance Amazon. Um, if you don't know me, I have a background in the biological sciences, um, nutrition and exercise sciences, and I'm also a dancer, a trained dancer specializing in the dances of the African diaspora. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the African Native American mix, what I call Afro-Indigenous, which I feel like is greatly overlooked um, in Black history, in American history, in Caribbean history, South American history, all of it. Los todos historias de Americas. Okay. So right now I'm in Cuba, and I can say I was inspired to do this video here, but this is something that I've been studying for years. Um, just to tell you a little bit about me. My dad, I come from a family of activists. My dad was heavily involved in the civil rights movement. He was born and raised in the oldest town in America, St. Augustine. Um, St. Augustine is also a town with a huge African, Native American mix in history, and that's in Florida in general, but in St. Augustine in particular. You have a history of runaway slaves running into Florida, being greeted by Seminoles, given land, given seeds to plant, and weapons, as long as they fought together against the U.S. military. There are many wars that were waged against Black Seminoles in Florida, and they um, never gave in, never signed any treaties, fought to the end. And I remember when I was a little girl, going to my dad's hometown in Florida, he told me that Florida Negroes were not like Blacks in the rest of the South. And he told me we were not some yes sir, yes ma'am Black people. In fact, my dad always hates when he hears, like I have a nephew who grew up in Georgia, right next to Florida my entire life. My nephew and my sister. And he came up to New York and he was saying yes sir, and my dad couldn't stand it. I think that reminds him of like slavery days or something. But I remember him saying we were not any yes sir, yes ma'am Black people. And if a white person called us a nigger, we fought, period. You know. Um, my dad was born in 1942. His mother, my grandmother, who passed away last year, she was born in 1921. And I was very close to her. So there's a lot that I learned about Black history, my ancestry from them. But in 1960, when the sit-in started in the colleges, my dad was a student at Florida A&M. He got kicked out of school for being involved in the movement, but also his grandfather told him, you have to leave Florida or you're either going to get killed or you're going to kill someone. So my dad went north to Philly, okay, and ended up in New York eventually in Harlem, where I was born and raised. But he was heavily involved in the movement. He knew Malcolm. He was at over 100 of Malcolm's speeches. He was there the day that Malcolm was assassinated. He actually got there after it happened. And which happened 5 blocks from where I grew up, the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, Washington Heights. Um, and also, my dad was a part of the organization that strategically put together the Black Panthers, the same organization that Assata Shakur belonged to. My dad told me that that could have been any of them. It could have been any of them. What happened to her could have been any of them because they had a code of conduct. You know, like if the police pulled them over, they were to open fire or something like that. But now, as an older man, my dad realizes that Martin Luther King was a real brave one for staying in the South. He always told me the South was a different beast than the North, you know. And he stayed in the South, and his organization is what really made change. Because there's no way that we're going to overthrow the government in the United States. This is not Haiti. We are not the majority. In Haiti, the Africans greatly outnumbered Europeans. But here in this country now, you know, we're not the majority by any means in this huge land with a huge, powerful military. And if we thought that we were going to overthrow the government with violence, the military would drop a bomb on you, and that's it. So that's not possible, you know. So regardless of all of that, the thing that I really want to talk about is this African-Native mix. I remember when I first started learning about it, and I was like maybe 20 or something like that. I had taken a train to Long Island, And on the way back, there was a white man who was looking at me. He said, "Who's Indian in your family?" And I was like, "Huh?" And I remember going home and saying that to my dad, and he told me, "Yeah, you can't tell when you look at your mother, like you can't see her features." And I'm like, "No, I guess not, because we were never taught that. Everything was always black and white, and the Indians are dead. And, Native people in this country are treated like an extinct species, which is totally not true." And so that was the beginning. And I remember this book that my dad had on his bookshelf my entire life called Black Indians, written by a man named William Loren Katz. And I saw it in my life. So now I picked up this book. I started reading his history, where he's saying, like, there's this history of Africans and Native Americans in the Americas, not just in North America, but also in the Caribbean and South America, that has been ignored and overlooked. And a history of fighting together, history of joining forces and fighting together. The Native tribes' ancestry in my bloodline, the Seminole basically stands for runaway. Runaways, Cinnamon in the Spanish countries. So you have Cinnamon in Cuba, in Puerto Rico. You have, Cinnamon. Or in Jamaica, same thing, Cinnamon, maroons, the maroons. You have maroon, Cinnamon, Seminole, same thing. Runaways, And when Africans ran away into the bush or ran away, they were usually greeted by native people. And the people who are native to the Caribbean, the people who are native to the American South and South America are not light-skinned people. A lot of times when people think of Native Americans, they think of light-skinned people, But the people who are native to Puerto Rico, to Jamaica, Haiti, Florida, Georgia, they are like, my complexion. A lot of times their hair is very long and straight. And Native American hair is different than European hair. It's not like European hair. It's not like hair from India. It is not like African hair, okay? So just me growing up in Washington Heights, New York, around a lot of Dominicans. A lot of Dominicans would say that they weren't black. They would say they were dark-skinned Indians. A lot of black Americans would get mad at them for that. But however, I don't completely blame them, because a lot of them are dark-skinned Indians. Now, it's one thing to say that you're a dark-skinned Indian. It's another thing to deny your African ancestry completely. But that's the same thing a lot of black Americans here do too, and deny their native ancestry. Now, there's a lot of miscategorizations happening, and this is, again, something I've studied a lot, and I have put some books down below so you can actually read and study further into this. But the government, has a history of, especially in the United States, putting native people in the category with Africans. A lot of people don't know that during the slave trade, while many Africans were shipped over to the Americas, many indigenous people were shipped to Africa, because it was known that you can't enslave people on their land. And so I grew up seeing Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, even black Americans who were my color, darker, that had hair, Indian hair, When I say Indian hair, I mean native, indigenous hair from this land. But some people, it's not in their hair. Some people may be in their facial features, but maybe they have hair like an African, or maybe their hair is mixed. Like a lot of Dominicans, they have this long, coarse, thick native hair, but then it's a little curly. It's not as kinky and as dry as African hair, but it's somewhere in between. You can see the undertones in the skin. I remember when I first started going to Brooklyn, and I was seeing Trinidadian girls. From the back, I didn't know if I was looking at a black girl or an East Indian girl, because East Indians have different undertones in their skin. It's like a greenish color. It looks completely different than the undertones that you see in Afro-Americans and people from Puerto Rico, Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, even Brazil, where you see more of that, the indigenousness. It's more of a red. Also, the features, because I remember, looking at Celia Cruz, Celia Cruz looks very Native American to me. If you look at her nose and her eyes, her features look very Native American, just like Shaka Khan, just like Pam Grier. Pam Grier, in her older years, looks very Native American. But we've just been taught not to see it. And my mother, my dad is from St. Augustine. My mom is from Western Pennsylvania, about a town 30 minutes away from Pittsburgh, in the middle of nowhere, close to the border of Ohio. Her mother was born in Washington, Pennsylvania, in 1909, 1911 or something like that, 1913, a long time ago. But my mother's father, my grandfather, passed when I was a kid. He was born, he was born 1911, but he was from Pensacola, Florida. And I don't even meet people from Pensacola, Florida. I don't really meet people from Florida, period. But my mother's father is from Pensacola, Florida. My dad's entire family was from St. Augustine, Florida, for as far back as we can trace. Both ended up in Pennsylvania for some place, my dad's family in Philly, my mom's family outside of Pittsburgh. And my mom told me that when she was a little girl, she grew up with her native grandmother, but the woman never discussed it. But my mom said that she had very red skin and her hair was very, very long and thick. But my mom said when she was a little girl, there was no discussion of native people. It was just if you weren't black, you were white, and that was the discussion, period. So it bothers me because if black people, and I put that in quotes because most black people in America are a mixture of African, Native, and European. And the European blood is not always because somebody raped somebody. It's not always that. Like my mother, her side, there's a lot of Polish blood, and it wasn't through rape. And then my dad too, something, I don't know. But what was I going to say? That in St. Augustine, the town my dad is from, has a huge history of African Native American history. That was a town where a lot of Native American prisoners were kept. Chief Osceola, who was a very famous and important Seminole chief, who was married to a black woman. And my dad told me that when he was a kid, his grandfather, my dad's grandfather, used to give tours of that prison where they kept Chief Osceola. Chief Osceola starved himself so much until he got so thin that he could just squeeze through the bars in the prison and jump into the water and get free. And my dad said his grandfather was so proud to tell that story all the time. So it bothers me that, in this country you have African history or Afro-American history taught separately than Native American history. A lot of times black Americans or black people over here do not identify with or care about the issues of Native people. And I remember telling my dad that, during the Civil Rights Movement, we would have had a stronger argument if we were saying, yes, we're owed stuff because, our African ancestors worked for free, they were exploited, made this country rich, right? So you have a lot of black people that keep talking about their 40 acres and a mule. However, we can't expect 40 acres and a mule from stolen land because if black people want 40 acres and a mule, what about their native people whose land this was taken from? What did they get? We are not entitled to stolen land, And that is not how land works anyway. That's not how the indigenous people that lived here saw it in the first place. And I think it is extremely disrespectful that so many black people in America don't care about native issues and things. And when it is highly intertwined into our culture. I mean, black people, we eat corn bread and grits and corn on the cob, and everything that's corn comes from native people. Corn is just completely a native food. You might have corn in Africa, but it came from the natives, okay? Here. And I don't like the fact that, a lot of people act like Africans are the only ones with intelligence. People will give respect to India and Asia, but when it comes to Native Americans, people are always like, oh, yeah, well, they act like they learned everything from Africa. They don't ever want to give them their own credit. And, as Afro-Americans, which is the correct term, as people with African blood, African ancestry and Native ancestry from this land, it makes us a stronger people. It also makes us different than Africans, and that's why sometimes Africans will say we're not the same, we're not like them, and we're not. I acknowledge that I have African ancestry, but I also acknowledge I have Native ancestry, and I'm not African. I have no connection to Africa. I don't speak any African languages, and I would have to take shots probably to go to Africa. So, for as far back as I can trace, my family is buried on this land. I have people in my family who fought in the Revolutionary War on this land. So I consider myself American. I do care about this land. I do care about the Americas because we have a linked history. However, I've seen plenty of people that say that they're black and their features look straight Native American. They look like they're more Native American than anything. But then they're saying that they're black, and a lot of that is because this society made everything black and white and the Indians are dead. If we open up our eyes to see these features, and open our eyes, you can see it. So I remember when I went to Costa Rica for the first time 10 years ago, I'd be in certain towns where you see a lot of indigenous people. They were like my color, with straight hair. then you would see Africans, because there's a lot of people from Jamaica who are like, I've been to Jamaica before, and Jamaica's not as mixed as people might think. I feel like there's more mixtures in North America. There's more mixtures in Puerto Rico, in Cuba, in DR. But Jamaica, when I was in Jamaica, mostly everybody was just black, like really, really black. You dark, well, you could be in Ghana. And what do we call it? Oh, what was I gonna say about Jamaica? Damn it, I forgot my train of thought. Oh yeah. So you would see in the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, the people that came from Jamaica who were like straight up African, like they didn't look like they're mixed with anything, straight up dark skin, kinky hair, African. Then you would see the indigenous people, who were like my color, had red in their skin, had different hair texture. So you would see, the Africans, the native people. Then you saw the people who were mixed, who looked like most black people in America. And so you see that clearly. So I see the same thing here in Cuba. The guy who picked me up from the airport, he was clearly a Native American. Also, one of my waiters, they're like clearly Native American. They don't even look like they're part white or black. They just look straight Native American. And then you see people who look straight African and people who look like they're mixed. And this is one of the things that bothered me a lot about Henry Louis Gates, Black in Latin America, is that he downplays the Native mix, number one. Number two, for him to say that like only about 5% of Afro-Americans have Native American blood is utterly ridiculous for a few reasons. And this is the thing, people need to use critical thinking skills, okay? Now, I have a background in biology and biotechnology in particular. Before I got into exercise and sports science, I was very much into genetics. And so I can tell you that the world in the field of genetics is not an exact science, okay? Also, it is impossible to have a sheet of all the genetics of every single little ethnic group on the planet. That's impossible. That would mean that scientists would have had to have been able to decode the DNA of every single little ethnic group in the corner of the globe, which they have not, because nobody can get access to, you can't tell me that they've done genetic tests on every little group, number one. Number two, you have certain groups like in Nigeria with the Yoruba, you could have like a certain ethnic group that is mixed over time, because sometimes one tribe, might have captured some people from another tribe and they joined in, or, so you have sometimes tribes that mix and then they're under the same name, but they're not really from the same ethnic group. That's happened in Asia and Europe and Africa, all over the place. So we're just that alone, it's flawed, okay? Also, let's understand that the U.S. government, they're the same people that said one drop of black blood makes us black, right? That's the law of the U.S. government. Brazil doesn't have that rule. Cuba, Puerto Rico doesn't have that rule. So how they classify race in other countries is different. Your race depends on the country you live in. Vanessa Williams, the singer, who damn looks white, has, hazel eyes. If she lived in Brazil, they would not call her black, okay? They would not call her black in Puerto Rico, but in America, she's black. One drop of black blood makes you black. That's not based on anything scientific or factual. That's based on something that America made up to basically say that once you were touched by the tar brush, you're tainted, right? So there's plenty of people who look white as shit who are so-called in this black category, and I don't consider them black. Like, if somebody has to tell me you're black and you get sunburned, you're not black to me, okay? So, the U.S. government says that the same people who said you have 3/5, black people are 3/5 of a person, all of that is made up stuff, okay? So when people say, like, oh, all the Indians are dead or all the Native people are dead, first of all, it's like somebody, if the reality of genetics is that one drop of anything does not override everything else. So if you're Chinese and Korean and East Indian and you have so-called one drop of black blood, that one drop of black blood does not override your Chinese genetics, your Korean, everything else is running through your veins. They all matter. Okay? So race in itself does not make sense scientifically. It doesn't exist scientifically for that reason. Because races are now made up by skin color, but if they were made up by eye color, races would be different. Skin color is one genetic trait. Or, like if race was made up by height or hair texture, races would be different, right? But even under skin color, all people that are considered black in America don't have the same skin color. So if Lauryn Hill is considered black and Vanessa Williams is considered black, then how do we describe black? Like, when are we too light to be black? When is your hair too straight? Or how would you define black? Like, just think for a second. Just make your best definition of how you define black and then see everybody, all these different black people fit that description. It doesn't, right? And so you could say it's even a cultural thing. But then there are people like I have cousins who their skin is dark as shit. They're clearly black, but they grew up with a white culture, and they think they're white on the inside, but they're not white. So you can't even just say it's just culture, because you have white people who grew up culturally around black people, but they're still white. So you can't say it's just culture, you know. So it's really flawed. But regardless of that, I don't know what happened to the light. It just got bad. The sun just changed. But regardless of that, we have a. Sorry, I had to stop because people keep walking by staring on my face. Since the light has changed so much in this video, I'm probably going to stop soon and do a part 2. But I do suggest you look at some of my videos below. Not videos, sorry, books. And my main point, I don't know where the light is. Where's the light? Where'd the sun go? Okay, here it is. Gotta chase the light. Okay, so my main point is that there is a very deep and complex history of blacks and Native people in the Americas. And whenever I go in a botanica, which is like basically a place where people that practice African traditional religions, but let me see if I can move. Okay, botanicas are a place for people that practice traditional African religions to get the herbs and everything they need, the candles and all the medicinas they need for their rituals and whatever else they do. Whenever I go to botanicas in New York or when I see them anywhere, there's a lot of African stuff, but I always see like a statue of an Indian and the people of an Indian, of a Native person from here. And the people